morning. It's April 18th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the U.S. military's recognition of North Korea's missile capabilities. The commander of U.S. versus Korea says the regime's missiles are capable of reaching Washington, D.C. and beyond. Meanwhile, the North says it will go ahead with launching its first military reconnaissance satellites as planned. The European Union has agreed on a multi-billion-dollar plan to increase semiconductor supply. The plan is to grasp 20% of the global chip market by 2030. And South Korea has rolled out a mission to wipe out drug crimes in a bid to return to being a so-called drug-free nation. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has ordered the launch of the regime's first military surveillance satellites as planned. Now, that's within this month. The North Korean media reported on Wednesday that Kim, inspecting the regime's space agency, called for final preparations to be made for the launch. Kim reportedly said it should be followed by more launches for collecting data, and that pursuing a surveillance satellite is a part of its sovereignty and self-defense. He cited the deployment of U.S. strategic assets to the Korean peninsula, claiming it is turning the South into Washington's outpost against the North. This comes as Pyongyang last December announced that it has conducted a critical final stage test in developing a reconnaissance satellite and is aiming for April as the deadline for completing the process. It's been nearly a week since North Korea test-fired what it called a new solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile, a development that's put the U.S. and Korea on high alert. In a hearing on Tuesday, the commander of U.S. forces Korea said that the Kim Jong-un regime is capable of striking the U.S. Capitol and beyond. Our Han Sang-woo has the details.
Commander of the U.S. Forces Korea, General Paul LaCamera, has warned that the Kim Jong-un regime in North Korea has developed military might capable of striking Seoul, Tokyo, Washington, and beyond. At a House Armed Services Committee hearing on national security challenges in the Indo-Pacific, LaCamera told American lawmakers on Tuesday that the priority of the USFK is to protect the U.S. and its allies, stressing that the United States' alliance with South Korea has deterred Pyongyang from waging war for nearly 7 decades and helped South Korea develop into a prosperous democracy. Taking into account the North's evolving nuclear and missile threats, though, he highlighted the need to strengthen the alliance, saying that the U.S. must never take it for granted as its center of gravity in deterring the Kim regime, and that the Korean War taught the U.S. that it must always be ready and forward-postured with its allies to ensure continued peace and stability on the peninsula. The general reassured the committee, however, that the joint forces are ready should Pyongyang increase hostilities. But regarding what's believed to be a new solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile the North test-fired last week, LaCamera said that such ICBMs do influence the United States' so-called indications and warnings efforts. Solid-fuel ICBMs are known to be harder to detect and require less pre-launch preparation. Congressman Seth Moulton of the Democratic Party expressed similar concerns the same day, pointing out that the 11 ICBMs Pyongyang displayed in a military parade back in February show that the U.S. may not have enough missiles to intercept them to protect its mainland. Han Sang-woo, Arirang News.
The U.S. has avowed a stronger commitment to countering nuclear threats, pointing to the dangers posed by North Korea, China, and Russia. In a news conference on Tuesday following the G7 foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the talks were focused on addressing Pyongyang's ballistic missile launches, Russia's suspension of a nuclear arms treaty, and China's buildup of its nuclear arsenal. He also cited Iran's expansion of nuclear activities, adding that all these only strengthen Washington's determination to address nuclear dangers. On the same day, during an annual NATO conference on arms control, Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman pointed to the same countries, stressing the need for NATO's united deterrence. The EU on Tuesday followed in the footsteps of the US to reduce reliance on semiconductor supply from other countries. Now, the bloc aims to increase its global chip market share to 20% by 2030. Our Lee Seung-ja has more.
Last August, the U.S. signed its CHIPS Act with the aim of producing more semiconductors in the country. And on Tuesday, the EU agreed to a $47 billion plan for its semiconductor industry in a move to catch up to both the U.S. and Asia, while reducing its dependency on regions outside the bloc for its semiconductor needs. The EU CHIPS Act, which was initially proposed by the European Commission last year, looks to double the EU's share of global chip output to 20% by 2030, compared to the current production output of 10%. The plan also allows the bloc to build up its local semiconductor supply chain and prevent any chip shortages for important sectors, such as the automotive industry. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen praised Tuesday's deal, saying the CHIPS Act will allow for a competitive chips industry and build a foundation for a global market share. With Asian semiconductor players like South Korea, Taiwan, and China already dominating the global market share, it'll be tough competition ahead, with the EU needing to quadruple its production rate to meet the 20% target. But since the news of the EU's chip subsidies plan last year, the EU has attracted over $100 billion in public and private investments. On top of that, the EU CHIPS Act has expanded the scope of these subsidies to further boost its competition against other countries. This includes a plan to expand subsidies across the whole production cycle to include research and development centers and mature chip production, and not just the factories where the chips are made. Lee Seung-ja, Arirang News.
Over in Sudan, clashes are still being reported despite an internationally brokered 24-hour ceasefire between the regular army and the rival paramilitary rapid support forces. Conflicts are reportedly ongoing, mostly in the capital Khartoum, with both sides accusing the other of failing to respect the ceasefire. The truce agreement followed discussions between warring factions and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and other countries in order to evacuate the wounded stranded in crossfires. According to the German press agency, at least 270 people have been killed in the conflict so far, with 2,600 people being injured. Drug crimes have never been too much of a headache here in South Korea, but with a fast-growing number of drug-related crimes, President Yoon Suk-yeol has declared a mission to combat illegal drugs. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
President Yoon Suk-yeol expressed concern over the rise in illegal drug use in Korea and called for a comprehensive campaign to fight it. He said it's especially shocking how prevalent drugs are for teenagers.
지난 10년 전까지만 해도 대한민국은 검찰, 경찰은 물론 해경, 보건당국, 세관 등 많은 기관의 협력과 노력으로 마약 청정국을 유지할 수 있었습니다. 그런데 어느 순간부터 정부 당국의 방치로 마약이 국민의 건강과 정신을 황폐화시킬 뿐 아니라 청소년의 꿈과 희망을 파괴하고 있습니다.
This came as President Yoon held a cabinet meeting this Tuesday morning. In his opening remarks, which were broadcast live, he also emphasized that the number of drug-related convictions is expected to surpass 20,000 this year for the first time. He made sure to set a deadline and call for relevant agencies to work together in eradicating the drug-related crimes.
He re-emphasized that all government agencies should come up with a plan together to respond to the growing illegal drug problem, so there could be a clear result by the end of this year.
During the cabinet meeting, President Yoon also shared his intentions to root out nepotism in the workplace, underscoring that it violates the country's constitution. This, as he said, the core of labor reform in South Korea is upholding the rule of law. He also urged relevant ministers to give priority to budget management to ensure productive government spending, saying the blind distribution of cash and patronizing populist policies need to be rejected. 김도연, Arirang News.
과거 데이터에 기반한
The world's oldest surviving book made using movable metal printing, Korea's Jikji 심체 요절, is on public display in Paris for the first time in half a century. It was printed in the 14th century. For more on this Korean literary treasure, we're joined by Director David Redmon. He's also a co-director of the documentary on Jikji, Jikji Code. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. First off, Director Redmon, I've read that you are the one who proposed making the Jikji story into the documentary Jikji Code. What was it about the story that made you so passionate about it?
Well, I'd been to Korea before, and I'd heard about Jikji, and I kind of discounted that this was the first book. I grew up in the Canadian education system, and we were taught that Gutenberg had invented movable metal print, and he changed the world. So back in 2013, I was traveling in Europe, and a friend of mine asked me to go to the French National Library and apply to see Jikji. I was curious, I went along, and we were shocked by the attitude of the staff at the library. Nobody knew anything about Jikji, and they even pointed out to us that Gutenberg was first, not Jikji. So finally, we found one person that looked Jikji up on the internet. And they said, oh my God, it's here and we own it. And what an amazing collection we have. And so, I just realized at that time just how prevalent Eurocentrism is. And then I started to analyze my own thoughts on that and how I was resistant to believing that this technology came from Korea and it wasn't a different vocabulary or a different technology. It was movable metal print. So then I started looking at, I realized I also had shared this Eurocentric view, and it comes from the systems that we were taught and we grew up in. So then I thought, looked at what UNESCO and the Korean government were doing to promote Jikji, and I thought, well, if you look at it, over almost everybody in the world, nobody knows anything about Jikji. So I wanted to do something to try and help change that narrative and try to right this historic wrong. And that's when I started making this documentary.
That's amazing. Your curiosity turned into discovering much uncovered history, and also turning that history into a meaningful masterpiece, the documentary Jikji Code.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
And
I'm
also,
not sure it's a masterpiece, but
it is a good documentary. Now, for those who may be unfamiliar with the history behind Jikji, could you explain why Jikji is in France at the moment, not Korea?
Okay. So in the 19th century, the first French ambassador to Korea was Colin de Plancy. And he was a collector of books and art and furniture. And he took Jikji back to France, and it ended up being donated to the French National Library. And they lost it for decades. And then in 1967, Dr. Byung-sung Park, a Korean academic working at the library, rediscovered it. Now, the current French government stance is they would loan Jikji back to South Korea. But right now, as you know, it's on display at the French National Library. And if you want to see it, you got to buy a ticket and fly to Paris to see it.
Right. Well, it sounds like you have much passion for not just Jikji, but also overall the books and the metal printing and involving all the history. Now, the question is, why do Jikji's story and history matter? I mean, why does the world need to know and learn about it, as you've created a documentary on it, a whole documentary on it?
Right. Well, Jikji is important for several reasons, and one of them is spiritual. Jikji's message is non-possession, ironically, and another message is interconnectivity. but also the technology. This is the proof that Korea was using this technology before anyone else. Now, movable metal print, it's metal, so it's hard, it's durable, it's movable. So the economy of scale allowed books to be produced en masse. So that changed the way that we were able to record and transmit information. And in Europe, in the 15th century, that started the world's first information revolution. And so if we look at Korea, I think that this is actually Korea's most important cultural export. We have K-pop, K-drama, and my favorite is K-food, but this is K-print, if you will, and it changed the world.
Right. Before we let you go quickly, please do share with us one of your favorite memories from the filming the documentary.
Oh, okay. I don't know if this is my favorite, but it's certainly the most impactful. On the third last day of our European trip, we've been there for three weeks. We had everything stolen in Rome, our computers, our camera equipment, our footage. And so it was devastating. You know, it was a crisis, and it was a point where I was thinking we weren't going to be able to continue this project. And so, but you know, in a crisis, it sounds cliche, but you find a detail that spurs you on. And we've been doing a lot of research on the envoys in the 13th and 14th century that have been traveling from Europe all the way to Beijing and Korea. Now, those people really suffered a lot of hardships and dangers on the road. And here we were in hotel rooms in Rome eating, wonderful Korean or Italian food and moaning about the situation. So I had a credit card left, the only one on the team, and we took that card and we rented a car and we drove back across Europe for 2 weeks and we shot the film.
Wow, what a story. That turned out to be, like I said, a masterpiece.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much for joining us this morning and also your insights all the way from Toronto.
Okay, thank you.
South Korea has decided to extend its fuel tax cut measures until the end of August to ease the burden on people's livelihoods. They were due to expire this month. Under the extension, tax cuts on gasoline remain at 25%, while the rate for diesel is unchanged at 37%. Finance Ministry's Tuesday's announcement came despite concerns about the government's tax revenue, which recorded its greatest ever on-year decline earlier this year. The ministry added that the recent announcement by the OPEC Plus about production cuts was also taken into consideration. With oil prices hitting record highs around the world last year, South Korea has been offering a temporary concession on fuel. South Korea has issued its first ever report on climate change adaptation. Now, it shows the country's climate is heating up at a faster pace than the global average. Our Lee Si-hoo tells us more.
South Korea's climate is warming at a faster rate than the global average. From 1912 to 2020, the average annual temperature in South Korea has increased by approximately 1.6 degrees Celsius, surpassing the global average of 1.09 degrees Celsius. This is according to the Ministry of Environment's report released Tuesday on the nation's sustained efforts and actions toward climate adaptation. Titled The Republic of Korea's Adaptation Communication, the report serves as the first of its kind submitted by Korea to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change as required by the Paris Agreement, an international treaty on climate change signed in 2015. The report notes that from 1968 to 2017, the sea level temperature in South Korea has risen by 1.23 degrees. This is 2.6 times greater than the global average of 0.48 degrees. The sea level from 1989 to 2018 has also risen by an annual average of 2.97 millimeters, surpassing the global average annual rise of 1.7 millimeters. To adapt to such change, South Korea has established a multitude of legal frameworks, policies, and institutional arrangements. Following the nation's first legal framework for climate change adaptation, enacted in 2010, the Framework Act on Low Carbon, Green Growth, in 2021, the Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth for Coping with Climate Crisis was passed, with enforcement to begin a year later. The law requires the central government to monitor climate change and implement adaptation plans. The nation has also developed what's called the Master Plan on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth, which provides guidelines for responding to climate change until the year 2050. Meanwhile, South Korea is actively sharing its experience in implementing effective adaptation plans. The Ministry of Environment in its report reaffirmed South Korea's commitment to working with the international community in achieving the global goal on adaptation established under the Paris Agreement. Lee Si-hu, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the United States, where Fox News has agreed to pay just over $787 million to settle a defamation suit filed by Dominion Voting. The decision was announced in the Delaware Superior Court on Tuesday local time, just before lawyers for both sides were set to deliver their opening arguments. Dominion Voting initially sought $1.6 billion in its lawsuit. It was filed after Fox News broadcasts supported false claims that Dominion voting machines were used in ballot rigging during the 2020 U.S. presidential election. Dominion Voting claimed that the broadcasts had damaged its reputation. It was also revealed that several Fox News employees did not believe the claims but broadcast them anyway. As part of the settlement, Fox News has admitted to telling lies, but has said it is pleased to end the legal dispute. Dominion Voting has called the settlement historic. Turning over to China, where state media says that at least 21 people have been killed in a hospital fire. The fire broke out at Beijing's Changfeng Hospital on Tuesday local time. Some patients, desperate to escape the flames, climbed out of their windows by tying together bedsheets to make ropes. At least 71 people have been rescued, and the fire has since been extinguished. It's not clear if all the people who were inside the hospital have been found or how many of the dead were patients. The cause of the fire is still being investigated. Now, tech billionaire Elon Musk has said he will launch a new artificial intelligence platform called TruthGPT. In an interview with Fox News on Monday, Musk said it will challenge other AI platforms offered by OpenAI and Google. According to the 51-year-old, TruthGPT is, quote, unlikely to annihilate humans and will seek to understand the universe. But the platform's development progress is unknown. Musk, a co-founder of OpenAI, has accused its ChatGPT of being trained to lie. In March, he joined 1,100 tech industry leaders who signed an open letter calling for a 6-month halt to the training of AI. This over fears that it may pose a threat to humanity.
Good morning. On Monday, despite murky and wet start to the day, we had a really nice turnaround in the late afternoon, and that trend continues today. And even those of us in central parts of the country will see T-shirt weather with temperatures going up 10 degrees higher than yesterday afternoon. So it will feel more like late June than April today. But it is a breezy start to the day under dazzling sunshine in the capital area. Sunshine will send highs well into the high 20s this afternoon, leading to gaps of more than 15 degrees Celsius in most parts of the country. More pleasant news is air quality. It will be normal to good nationwide today, except in Incheon. Meanwhile, southern provinces will be under rather cloudy skies with cooler highs at just 19 degrees Celsius in Busan. The capital region's summer warmth will last for the day. Then light rain in northern central regions will bring back seasonal norms tomorrow, while southern provinces will get a glimpse of summer with an expected high of 30 degrees Celsius in Daegu tomorrow. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That is all we have for today's New Day at Arirang. Thanks for watching.
South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduced a Korean New Day. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
Loved and watched around the world. We want to make more animations to reach more children. Traveling time and space. Developing adventure and curiosity. Infinite creativity and hope. We want our children to grow up to be happy. animation watched by children all around the world. So that joy can be felt when our animation is watched. This is the reason we make animation and share with the world. K-Animation, befriending children all over the world.
We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation. Making news just for you. It's April 19th here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Kim Xiang.
Good morning, Yoon.
Good morning. And Niall Song. Hi, everyone. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. We're going to start with the news feed, a news feed which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, the first one is we start with this year's Songkran, the festival marking Thailand's New Year. As one of the biggest holidays in Thailand, people come out on the streets and have water fights. Contrary to its festive intentions, more than 230 people died from car accidents during the holiday season. The number injured increased by roughly 20% compared to last year. Officials said this was partly due to many people trying to go home at the same time after celebrating the holidays. Moving on, Time magazine has compiled a list of the 100 most influential people this year. Olena Zelenska, the First Lady of Ukraine, made it onto the list this year as one of the most prominent leaders. She stood next to others like U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and President Joe Biden. The police have started an investigation looking into a teen who committed suicide while streaming live on social media. The female student, whose identity has been withheld, fell from the top of a 19-story building in Gangnam-gu district in Seoul. She streamed the whole process with dozens watching, and the public is demanding that officials crack down on online communities where young netizens like this teen girl could share and even be encouraged to go through with their plans of suicide. Now let's look a bit more in depth into the third news item. The online community this teen girl was active on was a depression gallery on DC, a popular online platform. Now this teen allegedly made contact with another male user who uploaded a post asking for someone who would jump off the building with him. Now there's speculation that this teen met with this man and planned how to commit suicide, but local media later found out that while the two did meet up, he changed his mind. He also thought the teen girl did as well, and just seconds before this teen threw herself off the building, she said people should spend time away from their screens and not fall into the depression gallery she got hooked on. Now, let's first focus on this angle, Niall. It's not the first time people have been pointing fingers at this depression gallery. From 2018, online users have been requesting that this community be closed down, claiming that it causes a lot of physical and mental abuse. So what do you think about this?
For sure. I mean, it's really a double-edged sword, and I think people seek community even in their depression and their suicide attempts, and this just goes to show how dependent we are on each other as humans. And by all means, I am encouraging sharing, getting help. That's great, but you know, I think we should be careful. Sometimes be careful. No. all the time, be careful where you are sharing it, who you are sharing it. Make sure you're sharing in a safe, healthy environment so that, you don't end up indulging in the negative emotions and people aren't encouraging you to just keep digging deeper into it, And I really think the fundamental issue is not the community itself. It's the people who aren't getting enough support in mental health areas, and education is so important when it comes to mental health, and people need to be able to spot it, know how to deal with it, just like we know how to take care of ourselves when we're physically sick as well.
And there's definitely a lot of people who are responsible enough to give good advice on these online communities and, engage in really helpful conversations. But because you can stay anonymous, a lot of people go out of their way to hurt other people or, encourage people to do really bad things like committing suicide. But Xiong, another angle to this growing issue is that teen suicide rates have really gone up. Statistics Korea found that the number of teens who committed suicide has jumped by 20% in the last 3 years. And they cited COVID-19, academic stress, and loneliness as major reasons. But what else do you think are factors that causes this growing trend? And how do you evaluate efforts to bring these figures down?
Yeah, as you rightfully mentioned, academic stress, loneliness, COVID-19 is obviously quite a new concept, but those two have been quite a leading cause in leading to teen suicide rates in South Korea. South Korea also has the highest suicide rate overall in all of the OECD countries, which is also a huge concern for the government and the public as well. And I think one of the reasons more recently would be the financial stress as well. We've seen a few cases very recently where I think it was 3 people in their 20s to 30s taking their own lives over rental house frauds cases where they couldn't get their deposit money back and things like that. And they had to take their own lives because they basically spent all their savings, life savings, on these rental properties. So I think things like that built up the pressure, and the Korean government, especially the National Integration Committee, a presidential advisory committee, actually launched the Special Committee on Overcoming Suicide Crisis at the first special committee meeting this year on the 16th of February. So efforts like that is being shed light on by the government as well, and we'll have to see how that might be able to make the situation better for the suicide
But
rates.
I definitely think there needs to be more efforts done in this field because we're not seeing these figures drop. And that was our news feed for this Wednesday. Let's head into our discussion topic of the day now. Now, today we're going to take a closer look at the Russia-Ukraine war. It's been over 400 days since Russian forces invaded their neighboring country. So let's take a look at how far the war has gone. It's been decades since the Second World War divided the globe into two, the Axis powers and Allied powers. But we've seen the world divided yet again, this time between supporters of Russia and supporters of Ukraine. At the start of last year, Russian President Vladimir Putin decided to carry out a, quote, special military operation in Ukraine. Russia had already annexed Crimea in 2014 and supported pro-Russian separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk. But in February 2022, Putin's troops crossed over Ukraine's borders and attempted to capture Kyiv. Unlike Putin's expectations, though, the invasion hasn't been swift and easy. Instead, Ukrainian forces fought back with Western powers, namely the US and EU, having their back. Today, News Shen looks at 3 questions. 1. How severe is the situation over in Ukraine? 2. Why should millennials and Gen Z in other parts of the world pay attention to the war? 3. How is the war affecting the younger generation in both Ukraine and Russia? Last year, on February 24th, Russia's President Vladimir Putin sent roughly 200,000 soldiers into Ukraine, and Moscow assumed that its troops would sweep into the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, in a matter of days. But more than a year has passed, and the Russo-Ukrainian war is ongoing. Hundreds of thousands have been killed or wounded, and millions have been left as refugees abroad or displaced inside their own country. So before we go further, let's take a look at the screen to find out where the war is mostly taking place right now. As you can see, most troop movements are concentrated in the southern and eastern part of Ukraine. It's quite different from the beginning of the war when Russia tried to capture the capital. And after they failed to do so, they shifted focus towards the Donbas region. But over the last few months, neither side has managed to make a breakthrough. And for months now, the heaviest fighting has been concentrated in the Bakhmut region near Donetsk. But with Ukraine receiving weaponry and assistance from its NATO allies, Moscow is having a hard time and has lost some of its early gains. Ukraine is also trying to get its hand back on Crimea, annexed by Russia back in 2014. Now, this is currently what's going on in these war fronts. But Xiang, why don't you provide a bit more detail for us?
Yeah, so it's been 7 years since Russia officially annexed Crimea as well. 7 years meaning it was 2014, so at the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war. I mean, as you've mentioned, Russia invaded, full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in February 24th in 2022. And just before that, actually, it was soon after Ukraine received about $200 million in security aid from the United States in January 2022. We've seen actions of the Wagner mercenaries being hired to take out the President Zelensky, along with major atrocities of civilian casualties as well, where we saw hundreds of bodies found in mass graves in just outskirts of Kyiv as well during the early stages in places like Bucha, where we saw a lot of social media attention being garnered to shed light on these atrocities. Numerous airstrikes, as you can see on the screen, and missile launches hit Ukrainian cities as well, with thousands of civilian casualties, as well as the entire Europe seeing food and energy prices climb up. More recently, though, since the liberation of the Kherson by Ukrainian forces last November, both sides have been engaged in positional warfare with only minor changes in territorial control. After more than a year of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it seems the war has reached a stalemate, even with the President Putin of Russia visiting, as you mentioned, you might have mentioned this earlier today, visiting Kherson region to scan the surroundings and things like that.
Right.
It has been a stalemate, a deadlock for the past few months.
Now, it was Putin's second time to visit in 2 months in this invaded Ukraine regions. But contrary to what Putin aimed to gain, it seems like Russia has lost a lot more than expected. And we're not only talking about their casualties, but also economic drawbacks and international sanctions. So Putin is also facing an ICC arrest warrant for numerous war crimes, including the unlawful deportation of children. So Xiang, tell us more about the damage caused by the war.
Yeah, I mean, for the damage report on the first year into the Russo-Ukrainian war, let's have a look at the screen. According to the UN Commissions on Human Rights and Refugees data, until the 15th of February this year, we've seen just over 8,000 civilian deaths, including just under 500 children, and over 13,000 injuries, including just under 1,000 children as well. For the case of the military casualties data gathered until February 2023, the UK Ministry of Defence estimates at least 100,000 deaths for Ukrainian military, and that up to 200,000 Russian soldiers have lost their lives. Now let's have a look at this number of refugees. We have seen a great number of Ukrainian refugees having to flee their homes away from the destroyed cities. Until the 21st of February, we've seen a total of 18,844,000 refugees crossing the border away from Ukraine. The most common destination was Poland at 1.5 million and 63,000 refugees, followed by Germany at around 880,000, and Czech Republic at around 500,000, and a number of other European countries such as Italy, Spain, UK, and France.
So the Russian invasion of Ukraine has caused the worst refugee crisis in Europe since the Second World War. And what are your thoughts on this now?
I mean, just as we've seen, many Ukrainians sought asylum in their neighboring countries, and it was actually really touching to see people, waiting for people in train stations and opening their homes up and being very hospitable. But the fact that they had to do this, they had to go that measure to do that, is so heartbreaking. And people have lost their homes, obviously, and their loved ones, and we just say it like that. But it really is an emotionally traumatic time for them, and there's no guarantee for them to be able to return home anytime soon. So all we can can do is sit here and pray, but world wars, as we know, it was caused by a few different incidents and a few power people, and millions had to pay for this. But we really need to stop continuing this in the 21st century. Definitely. And we're now going to include someone who actually flew out from Ukraine as soon as the war broke out, right after this. So some of our viewers may have turned a bit numb towards news about Ukraine because we've seen so many stories and headlines on the tragedies for over a year now. But this is an ongoing war happening to actual people, and that includes people in our generation, young people who are risking their lives to fight for their country. So to find out more, we're going to include a Ukrainian millennial. It's Anna Boklin. She used to work at the Environment Ministry in Kyiv, but flew into Korea last March, and she's currently studying global environmental policy at the University of Seoul. But most of her family's still in Ukraine, so we're going to hear from her. Welcome, Anna.
Good morning, Anna.
Hi. So, Anna, I hear that you came to get your master's in Korea last March, but that was only a few weeks after Russia invaded your country. So it must have been very difficult for you. Tell us how you came to Korea and how difficult of a process it was.
Okay, I will start from beginning of war, because the day before of war, it was my birthday. 23rd of February, and it was amazing day when I get a lot of wishes, and it was feeling of new chapter of my life, because in next day I have to come to Korea, and I have tickets for airplane to come to Poland firstly, and at 26th of February I have come from Poland to Seoul. And at 23rd it was amazing day. I feel like it's new chapter of my life starting. But in early morning at 24th, my friend from Kharkiv, it's just near the Russian border, one of the biggest city in Ukraine, she called me, and it was, I think, 6 a.m. And she called me and scream, "Anya, how are you? Are you okay?" And why you wake me up? Why you call me so early? Are you mad or what happened? And Anya, war is started. And in that, I'm freeze, and in that moment, I didn't understood. No, it's impossible. Yes, we have war since 2014, but not full scale without rockets and aircraft for all our country.
Yeah, I see.
And I finished this talk, and I call my parents, and I talk with them we have some plans for today, but I think all of them are broken, what we have to do, because I was shocked, and I even didn't understood what I have to do and how I can to do, where I have to move, and what happened, what's going on.
Right.
And my parents think that maybe we can buy tickets for a bus and I can go to Poland and continue my previous plan, for coming to Korea for studying, because it was really great chance which I didn't want to lose.
Right, and I'm happy that you're here in Korea, but I hear that your family and friends are still in Ukraine. Where are they exactly? And tell us how the situation is like there.
finally, after they helped me come to Poland, because our plan with bus was not working, and we go by car without any stops, only for taking fuel, 4 days, I think. It was awful. Because firstly we didn't think about food and other things, and first 2 days it was at all without any food, and after we find some some help from volunteers.
I see.
And now they all are in Kiev, and when I told them and called them and how are you? And they tell me, oh, we're okay. But in nowadays, okay from Ukrainians, when you hear this, it means only two things: that they are alive and their property is not destroyed. It means okay.
Yeah.
So now, in almost not each day, because now situation it's a little bit calm, more calm than it was previously. So air alarms, and sometimes there is some rocket attacks around all our country. It's not only the borderline which you showed previously at the map. Because almost all our cities have a lot of destroys because of rocket attacks. And in our winter season, it was much more awful because our energy system was almost 50% destroyed.
Right, it was depleted.
Yes, and in a huge city as Kiev, it was crucial because a lot of new buildings have everything by electricity. And my mom broke her legs in this winter, and it was awful because she even couldn't go to shelter in the time of rocket attack, because we have apartment at 8th floor, and it's impossible to come down with break legs.
Right, and Anna, you're mentioning what's actually happening in the war. Thank you so much. You've given us a illustration of what's happening there. But I would now like to ask you the last question. So why did you decide to do an interview with us? I hear that you have something to share with the world for why we need to pay more attention to what's happening there, right?
Yes, and I really thankful for you to help us share this information, because for us it's really important. And in nowadays, in time of globalization processes, we all understood that one country maybe didn't make something great, but with help and with support, we already saw that even in our case, that we can stay, we can continue to fight, and it's really helpful for us.
Definitely, we should be helping each other because we are living in a global community. Thank you so much, Anna. We would love to hear from you again soon, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna.
All right. Now, we also asked what our global viewers had to say on today's topic. So we asked what they had to say on the ongoing war. If you take a look at the screen, Priyanka Chakraborty said pawns in the game are not victims of chance. The young always pay the price. War is stupid. Black Sword said war is always bad because the social and economic standards are negatively affected. And Art said the war is terrible and affects everyone in Korea, mostly through high inflation. It's always the young generation that sacrifices the most when things go wrong. And now that is why I would like to guide you guys towards the final part of our discussion. And we've just heard from Anna how severe the war is going on, and Anna asked for help from countries like us. As a global millennial yourself now, what would you like to see? How would you like to see the war going? Why would you like to see it end?
You know, I don't know how else to put this into proper perspective. When we see numbers on the news, we're just like, oh, you know, it's numbers. But hearing from Anna just now, it's so real and it's their lives. And to put things into perspective, to give you an analogy, it's like getting several different universities in Korea, all the students enrolled just dying over the course of a year, which is absolutely mortifying. It's horrible. It's their future, and it's happening right now. And who's to say we are going to be the exception? So we need to really help other nations out when this is happening.
Also, I think the reason why it's more concerning is that our generation, the millennials and the Gen Zs, aren't very used to physical conflict. The last war we had in a global scale was World War II, which is now almost, 80 years ago. So, I mean, the people are losing sort of there's a sense of reality of how dire the actual physical warfare will be. And what we're seeing now isn't just going to be Ukraine-Russian conflict and disappear. This is something that might turn into another Cold War stage where the countries, as you know, the BRICS, BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and things like that might gather around China and have another sort of Eastern bloc forming against the Western bloc of Europeans, America, Taiwan, including Japan and Korea as well. And we might see a structural geopolitical tension that might grow in the later stage and cause a havoc for the generation coming as well. So I think it's not just a concern about Russia, Ukraine. I think we should really see what we can do to help the people globally as well.
Definitely, because even at this moment, we're seeing young soldiers die and civilians die. So our attention is geared there. And we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Kim Seong.
Pleasure, yeah.
And now Song. Happy to be here. Thank you for watching, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today.